a lot of tools are oriented around like marketers because there's a lot of money to be unlocked there. But I think like enabling the developer to become a champion, that is really important to really making a sticky product.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Chris Bell from Knock. And Chris is very appropriately named as Chris Bell because Knock is a notification API. You're going to correct me on this, aren't you, Chris? But
I am, yeah. So hi everyone, and hi Jack. Super happy to be here today. So Knock is notifications infrastructure. We like to say infrastructure rather than just API because we see the value in the service as extending past just like an API surface area. So I think like one really good example of what we do is like we can power in-app notifications as well. So think about like the feeds that you see in lots of products, something like Vercel. We power that along with all of the real-time behavior that comes with that feed as well. So I think like, your deployment fails in Vercel, and in real time you're on the dashboard and you see a notification pop into your feed. That's all handled behind the scenes by Knock's infrastructure. Hence why we think about ourselves as being beyond just the API surface area.
this episode is brought to you by WorkOS. At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Knock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks WorkOS for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show. Yeah, it's really cool. And I think sometimes we forget how critical these things can be. Like I think we were talking before, I had a kind of some difficult instances where I think Riverside weren't notifying me that there was a guest, and yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We think notifications is one of those like incredibly valuable parts of your product that, provides a lot of customer value in the sense that you need it. It helps your customers get back into your product, engage with what's happening there. But it's also something that you shouldn't need to build. And also to build it really well is actually a lot of effort, So what Knock gives you out of the box is this kind of ability to deliver cross-channel notifications. So think about, I mentioned that in-app use case as well, but we can also do things like email, push messages, SMS, and then chat apps. So think about like Slack and integrating something into Slack and sending notifications there as a source as well. So we do all of that. And then we wrap up lots and lots of complex behavior around like batching notifications. So let's say that 3 guests arrived in your Riverside room, but you don't want to get 3 different notifications. You want to get 1 notification about those 3 guests. All of that kind of functionality is handled behind the scenes with Knock's infrastructure.
Yeah, I actually did back in the day build an app for someone, and I think I told you this, but it was like it was basically classes, and essentially the teachers side wanted to have notifications for when a new student joined their class. And yeah, we used Firebase, kind of like raw Firebase notifications. And it was like a huge part of our job. So yeah, it's very cool. I wish we'd had Knock at that point. So you mentioned that you're kind of passionate about making these like amazing experiences that like people can just use APIs. Could you talk a bit about how you design APIs? Because I know you have some interesting takes on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we think about at Knock, let's say that we're introducing a new primitive into our API. So a really good example of this is last year we released something called schedules. And schedules is basically like, I want to trigger this notification on this schedule for this set of users. So think of it like a managed cron job that you don't have to deal with, right? And we'll execute that in your users' time zones for you. We when we're approaching a feature like that, we think about it from first principles as, well, like, let's write the documentation first of all, and then let's design the API around that documentation that we're going to write. And then let's put that out there with a bunch of customers or prospects so we can start getting input into that. I think like, some of this is definitely borrowed from our dev tool overlords at Stripe, who I think we constantly cite as doing some really fantastic things, but it's something that's been ingrained into the early days of what we do here at Knock, where we think about like every feature that we're going to bring to market is going through this process of, writing really like great guides about how you would actually use that feature in anger when you're actually trying to do the job to be done that feature enables, And then we start to think about like the API design and iterating on that API design to make something that feels really ergonomic before we even write a line of code. And I think like part of the value in doing that is that, APIs, yeah, they can be versioned, but like versioning APIs is really hard. It's really, really difficult. If you think about like who's doing that best right now, and I think that is still Stripe. Sorry, I'm going to reference Stripe twice in like a minute. Like,
oh, that's great. That's simple for us to go research more. Yeah.
But I think Stripe's API versioning is really excellent, and they use a date-based versioning format. But like doing something like that off the shelf and building that into your own API is still a tremendous amount of effort. So we like to think about like really trying to get the API right the first time around, and really like being methodical about that API design process and making sure the primitives that we're introducing are really well thought out. They map really well to our existing APIs that we have. They have all of the same kind of attributes, the same stylistic properties, like the verbs are the same in those APIs, and just really making sure that I think there's like an aesthetic quality to this. Like we always write out like what the Node SDK call will look like in that doc so that we can start thinking like, does that feel right? Should it be more like this? Should we swap the ideas around? Should we move this into a different module? Something like that. So I think like that documentation just gives a really good place to start exploring that.
Yeah. Like, I don't even know how to ask this, but like, if you had to dig in a little bit more of like, you've got this kind of like, you're opening like a Notion file, or like, what is that first kind of part of the process like to get,
to get ideas down on paper?
Yeah, or just like, you're going to introduce a new service. Like, what is the very like first step you're taking there?
Yeah, I love to write out like, so everything that we write at Knock from a product perspective starts with like a positioning statement. So like, what are we shipping to market today? That usually happens in our product brief, but that gives a really good framing of like what we're doing. And then we write a problem statement about how we're trying to solve a problem for our customers.
So what would be like for the example you gave earlier about like the kind of like cron type notifications, like what would be the positioning statement and the problem statement for that?
Yeah, so the positioning statement there would be, today we're releasing our new schedules API that allows you to not have to write a cron job anymore to schedule your notifications, right? That's the marketing release that we're trying to say. And the problem statement is, if we're writing it in stories, it would be like, as a user, I don't want to write cron jobs because they're problematic, they fail a lot, and it's a part of my stack that I don't want to manage myself. And it's something that should be offloaded to Knock, right? So that frames like what we're doing. And now when we think about the external facing customer documentation, we can start to write things like, think about it more like a guide. Like, okay, so you're going to set up schedules, and those help you trigger notifications on a recurring basis for your audience, or your set of users. And we'll literally like write a guide that takes them through like what that looks like. And that it's really cool because that sometimes, not all the time, but that sometimes becomes the documentation that we actually ship as well, right? Like in our docs site.
When you say guide, it's like in a sense of like a tutorial, like
how you would use this to solve your use case is that kind of guide, so that you end up having like the building blocks and understanding of that feature, so that, if you are like, a prospect and we're talking to you about this API and how it will solve the use case that you've come to us with, right? So let's just say you're, I don't know, one of our customers, like Amplitude, they want to send a recurring notification to their whole customer base that summarizes maybe some metrics within a dashboard that you have, right? And here's how you can use that API to solve that particular issue. And sometimes we'll write customer specific versions of these documents to help frame that problem for them. And again, like that's that place where we can start sketching out the API, see what it would be like to use, like see what they think about it. Does it actually solve their problem? Does it make sense to them, as a concept? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you doing like, you would go like SDK first there, or like?
Sometimes, yeah. Like I honestly, like I think one thing that's been really interesting for me, so I write TypeScript a lot, and I also write a lot of Elixir because that's the language we use on the back end here at Knock.
Big in the Elixir world, aren't you? Like
I love it.
Big organizer. Yeah.
You shouldn't ask me about this because I won't stop talking about it. But
yeah.
I think what's interesting now for me is like I think in TypeScript a lot. When we're designing APIs, like not all of our customers use TypeScript, but it's just a really lovely place to start designing APIs and like interfaces, because you can start to think about like what's the type signature of this? Like what properties does it take in? Like, does that make sense? Like, should we have different filtering options? And then more often than not, it's kind of easy to back out like the REST API endpoint that backs that SDK method, right? And then the API around the SDK method. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it these days, and really starting with TypeScript and then kind of working backwards from there.
Yeah, it makes sense. It always feels like when like everyone can understand like REST, but it doesn't, like people tend not to like, use it like all day, and like it can sometimes, I feel like it just takes a little bit longer to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that you can hide really bad RESTful design behind a nice SDK anyway, right? And I think like a good SDK and good verbs in an SDK that makes sense, and like the API around that SDK, like that is the part that most of your customers are going to interact with. That's their surface area that they're thinking about, right? They're in the docs, they've got their language selected, and that's what they're seeing as the code sample. So I don't typically look at like, if I'm on a docs page for an API reference, I'm not thinking about like, oh, how's the like all the nouns and verbs of the REST endpoint constructed or whatever that is. I'm thinking about like, what's this feel like to use in my code base when I'm looking at like a block of code, from the SDK.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you go to the point where you're getting the user feedback, like how does that look like in terms, have you got any like examples of stuff that you've done to get that feedback?
Definitely. A lot of the time for us, that's a Notion page, and we make, we don't have a great way of doing this. So if you know of a better way, please tell me. But we basically clone the document for each customer we want to send it to, and send a customer specific version of that doc, right? And then allow commenting on it, and then like basically collate the comments, and then use that to inform the next version of the doc that we then send out.
And do people take the time to give you that feedback?
Oh yeah, like yeah, like it's awesome. Like we've been doing this like when we started doing Knock, like literally we started with the documentation. We didn't start with the actual like product. We started writing docs and sharing them out and trying to communicate what we're doing to get feedback. Yeah, and I think that's just been this like interesting, long-standing principle about how we thought about building products collaboratively. And it's not all like super data-driven where we're like, yeah, we got 7 comments, so that means that this is like great. It's nothing like that. It's definitely like vibes-based.
Yeah.
But it still helps. It still helps refine exactly what we are doing and articulating it, right? Like if someone doesn't get it from reading that doc, like the doc's wrong, or like the value proposition of what you're building is wrong, right? So I think it helps you really refine your messaging, which ultimately, if you think about being a developer tool, half the time, like you're trying to explain concepts to developers so they can leverage those to integrate your tool, right? And that has to be very concise, very clear. So we spend a ton of time thinking about just the language we use to explain features and, get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because I guess if Knock was like very difficult to figure out how to use it, then it's like the value prop is like half the value prop is gone, because like then it's just about reliability or something and not.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think like in our space with notifications in particular, like we are a flexible set of primitives, really.
Mm.
And that's a lot of words. What does that really mean? Well, it means that we offer like different APIs and building blocks so that we can try and solve whatever notification challenge you have. It can translate into Knock, right?
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with building very flexible products is it's really hard for you to go, wait, I've got this problem. How does that map to their domain and what they are doing, right? How do I think about solving this in Knock? And we have this, like the heart of Knock is this workflow engine. So you start designing the logic and the kind of like templates, the channels that your notifications go to. So like that is this very, very flexible system, but you need to kind of root the developer or the person doing the implementation in your nomenclature so that they understand like, okay, this is where I start. This is what I need to do. This is how I need to reason about this system over here, you know?
And how do you do that? Because that's quite, it feels like quite a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I would say we are not like, we're not bad at that, but that is a constant challenge, right? It's a constant, like the feedback loop there for us has been like, write the doc, do all that process I talked about around, you know, refining the feature before it goes out, write the documentation, you ship it. But I think like as soon as you have a customer like stumble over a part of a documentation or not get it, they come to a support channel, right? And they're like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing, but I don't really get how this works or whatever it is. Like that feedback loop needs to be incorporated into a PR that updates the docs like same day, you know? And that's the kind of process that we like, that loop, like we try and relentlessly go through it and just shave off those edges constantly, right? Like, hey, you were trying to use that schedules API, but like maybe you don't know what a cron is, and therefore it doesn't make that much sense to you, right? So the language is wrong in explaining that feature. Yeah. So I think like this is a challenge for any kind of developer tool that's got that, you've got a complex set of topics that you're trying to distill for people to understand. And then there's also this aspect of like, you don't want to overwhelm that engineer with all of this up front, right? Like that API I've been talking about, this schedules one, it's an advanced API. Like you might not even have a use case where you need to schedule a notification on a recurring basis, right?
Yeah.
So you want to we want to layer those things in gradually. So you want to, you know, like think about like the ladder of success. So those engineers getting started, but then having like knowing where to reach or find when they have that kind of need in, and they need to, you know, scratch that itch or solve that problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there any like kind of guidance that you have on like how to get that right? Of like, is it just hard work?
I think like that's been a struggle for us recently because the surface area of our product has increased quite a lot over the last year. And I think like architecting your docs to help your users like feel grounded and not feel overwhelmed is a really hard problem. To plug someone who I feel like is doing this very well, WorkOS, their documentation is fantastic. It truly is. Like, I think having very use case oriented docs, like they do a really good job of like, hey, I as an engineer am trying to build directory sync into my product right now, which is like, you know, you are an enterprise IT admin, you have a list of users. I need all of those users to be in this Knock account. And I, as a developer at Knock, am trying to integrate that directory sync process. Like they have a section of the docs that's like, you're integrating directory sync. It's all the topics, all the surface area around that. And it layers in complexity so that you can get to the advanced topics if you need to. You can start off on the really simple path. You know, it's kind of that like choose your own adventure of like where you want to get to and what kind of complexity you want to layer in. And I think that's the kind of North Star of where we want to take our documentation experience. Like a really good example of this in Knock is big part of notifications are preferences, right? Like the settings that you turn on and off.
Yeah.
And we have this like really flexible preferences model but it's really hard to get the whole surface area of it if you're just trying to do like the simple thing to get started. And we have one doc page that's like, here's everything you need to know. But like really that should be like many pages that help you kind of steer and help you solve the job to be done that you have of implementing, probably some simplistic set of preferences to get started, but then open the door if you need to do the more advanced stuff, like really having fine-grained user control over when a notification should fire. Like Vercel use us to do this for all of their usage-based alerts. I don't know if you've seen this in Vercel, but you can say like, when I've spent 125% of my budget, I want to be notified. That's all powered with Knock under the hood and uses this really complex part of our preferences model, So
that's cool. So is there like a part of you that's happy when you see like a dev like complaining about their bill? Like, that's us.
Well, I never want people to be frustrated with any other tool, but like we use Vercel to deploy Knock, and there is this element of pride where like, I guess when a deployment fails, we're always like, oh, that email is powered by Knock, So it's kind of cool. And then we're like, wait, we got to fix the build,
So, that's the crucial thing. Shout out Vercel. Okay, awesome. So one thing that we also wanted to talk about is about when you're coming into companies and it's not just this simple thing of like, hey, I'm going to use Knock to solve my problem. It's like they are like, you're dealing with a team who's kind of a central platform team, and then there's other teams branching off who use them, who come in and use them. Could you tell us a bit about why that's hard and like what you've learned in doing that?
Yeah, I love this topic as well. So yeah, I think, we kind of see these two different sales within Knock. One is like, you're a small engineering team, you're buying us, maybe you've got like an existing set of notifications that you're replacing with Knock, and we're going to start powering all of your notifications. And then the second sale is really the one that we've been butting up against a lot over the last year, which is more to this platform team. So, think you're at Amplitude. There are 10 different product teams all iterating on their own areas of the product. Typically what happens there is that every product team is building their own set of notifications. Maybe they have their own notification services. Maybe they're managing their own notification templates. So like, the emails they're sending and things like that. And some teams' remit is, hey, we need to centralize this and we need to have a single service that's powering all of these notifications, right? So that's where Knock comes in. And that's like the part of the sale where we can be really, really effective with these kinds of teams where, we are selling not just the ability to solve notifications for one team. We're thinking about it more as, you're coming in and you're deploying this across many teams. And then you are centralizing the system. We're giving your platform team a single place to observe this. So think about all the metrics that are coming off of it. Like I'm talking like actual like sending metrics that integrate into Datadog and things like that. So you can get observability into that system. And then the logs that are happening, and give them a single place to go to kind of understand all of the notifications that are going out to customers in a single centralized location. So in that model, we are, your buyer is this platform team, but then that platform team, they need to facilitate the adoption across all of these other product teams, right? So the sale becomes, you're selling to the platform team in this way where they need to think about like the tools that they need to roll this out across all those teams. So things like governance, like how do I allow access to certain notifications, but not allow certain parts of access to certain bits of the product, things like that. And then how do I report on each team's set of notifications that are going out so that I know who to page if in case something's going wrong, things that are like typical kind of platform engineering problems. And I think as a third party tool, kind of solving those challenges is very different often to solving the like individual sale that I talked about before.
Yeah. And like, what is it that is harder about it? It's like,
I would say the part that's challenging there is it's almost like the enablement part, right? Like you are one step removed from the team that's actually doing the implementation, right? Like you are no longer being like, okay, this team, you are implementing Knock. Here's what you need to do to go ahead and do this. You are setting that team up to then like maybe lay a little bit of the groundwork, but then that team has to help facilitate lots of other teams in basically saying, okay, this is how you're going to move your emails over to Knock, and this is how we're going to set up reporting, and this is how we're going to do all of these different parts. So it's much more like, I think the interesting part there is it's almost educational. So you have to start thinking about what materials do we need to arm that team with in order for them to be successful. Like you're almost serving like, it's like you are serving that platform team. They are serving their customers who are other product teams. And those product teams are serving the underlying customer for end users,
Yeah. And so, because I guess like in the worst case, you'd spend loads of time setting it up for the platform team, works for them, they're paying you money. You've got all these, usage that they're paying you for, but no one in any of the actual like kind of like product teams use Knock, and they just do whatever they had before. They don't bother to like make the change. And then
Absolutely.
in 2 years, it's like, oh, okay, why are we still paying for this thing?
That is exactly right. And I think like, you think about like driving successful outcomes for customers in that way, right? Like success for that platform team looks like some adoption metric. Definitely. It's, after year one, we want 70% of our notifications to be going through this service, right? Or like existing notifications, but we wanted to have layered in this new capability that Knock unlocks. Like, let's say they wanted to start sending Slack notifications, and then they need to evangelize that across teams to start powering it as well. So I think like, yeah, to your point, like a really bad outcome there is, hey, we bought this service, but like we haven't been able to help teams adopt it because it's just sat there in the roadmap or whatever and just been left to die. And like, it's much better to build the relationship with the platform team there to help them empower their teams to do the job, So that's one part we really think about is like, how can we be there in Slack with them? How can we help support that customer? How can we then be in a shared Slack channel across between that platform team and any other product teams that are helping implement, and really like give really, really great firsthand support to all of those folks at the same time.
Yeah. Is there ever a time where you kind of like, you have this great like momentum in a sense with the platform team, but you're getting like a lot of red flags around like, okay, like I feel like this is just going to go and just sit with them and no one, like, because I guess I feels like some part of it is like you could do it really well, but then it's like, so you can't, like you can lead them to the water, but like it feels like there must be cases where it's like really hard to get people to like actually adopt this when you're removed.
I think the challenge in a lot of tools like ours is prioritization on a roadmap, right? For that product team, and them being able to, like say, what's important this quarter? It is prioritizing this notification problem and making sure that we're implementing this, right? And doing that migration. But I think often that driver in the platform team setting comes from that team because they're under a remit to like deprecate an old service or turn off, a piece of infrastructure that they no longer want to support. So I think we can be in a good position in that way because like you're almost like they're driving the adoption for you. I think in the worst case, like the other side of this is the platform team couple us to some new capability they want to build internally. Like we've seen this in the past where it's like, hey, we never had like a Kafka real-time event stream, and now we want all our notifications to be powered by that. So no one else can adopt this until we've done that infrastructural work, and then we're going to start powering notifications, and then you're kind of just stuck in this like waiting period, Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it's like kind of in a sense, I just like playing back what you're saying. It sounds like okay, like if you're just working with the platform team, uh, like you kind of want to have like the pull from one of the product teams as well, rather than just be like the platform team think it's a good idea to do it. Like you actually want to.
I think that that's right, because usually the driver of like why a service wants to be replaced, like, I don't know if you ever think this, but I often, like, a saying that I always say is that engineers going to engineer, right? Like if you let engineers like do things, they're going to be like,
Yeah,
you know what we need to do, replace this service for reasons, you know?
yeah.
And I think sometimes that's not always true for all teams, but I think on platform teams, like that can be true. It's like, what's the new shiny thing we want to like do
Yeah.
right now? And I think often especially with notifications, like we're delivering value to customers effectively. And I think a lot of our sale, especially at Knock, is about product teams driving new outcomes, right? So like, what does that mean? Well, you know, we've never had an in-app notification system, or we want to start really easily messaging our customers like inside of the product, using that as a surface area. And then we want to rebuild our emails or like, you know, layering in that new capability that they couldn't have before. And that becomes the driver of why the adoption matters, right? And then it can spread outwards from there.
Yeah. And this actually gives me like a really good, interesting, at least interesting for me, segue, is that like when I was looking at notification tools back in the day, one signal was like the dominant one. But one signal is very, obviously, you know this for everyone else, one signal is very much marketed to marketers. And it feels like, you know, the developer, you know, the docs and stuff, it's like kind of an afterthought. But when you talk about those kind of capabilities, that sounds like the sort of thing that the marketing team would probably care about more than the development team, for instance. So I wondered like how like you like manage like who you're talking to and like how you approach companies and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I think the way that you're seeing the world tracks with how we see it. There are a swath of marketing tools that exist in the market, like Braze, OneSignal, Iterable. Like they're all tools that facilitate customer engagement by and large, which is basically sending messages to customers, right? Most of those are owned by marketers, and most of those tools have transactional capabilities. But like where we fit in right now is we are really thinking about transactional notifications for products. So think about like, you know, you're a dating app, someone matches with you and we need to send out a push notification and maybe an email. And it's those kinds of capabilities that we're encoding into Knock. And that means that our sale is much more driven by product and engineering, primarily. And I think the interesting part of the market today is like, there's like what we're talking about transactional, then there's marketing, and there's this like messy middle, which is like lifecycle marketing that's kind of owned by product, kind of owned by marketing.
Yeah.
You know? And that part in the middle is where we see like a really interesting expansion opportunity to start powering more customer-centric messaging that's not just transactional notifications, but is much more like just customer messaging that's really native to your product and leverages all the really great developer experience that we've built already with like React components you can just drop into your product, really good documentation, really great SDKs, like really good logging and observability that feel native to like if you had built that service yourself. So that, yeah, like I think the world is like the dirty truth of the world that you're talking about with those marketing tools is like they're bought by marketers, but they're implemented by engineers most of the time. Yeah. And engineers want the right tool, you know, and we're the ones in the journey now that are like, we have significant sway in the sales process, and we're like, have budget, and engineering teams have budget to purchase tools, you know? So that's how we see the world.
Yeah. It sounds similar to how, PostHog seemed to.
Yeah, on the like data and BI side, and like how they're thinking about it.
In terms of like coming at it from, I mean, they do a lot of things, I guess, but like maybe like Mixpanel would be one of the comparisons, whereas like Mixpanel is built for marketers, whereas they're like realize that a lot of developers are spending a lot of time with Mixpanel and product teams are, using Mixpanel a lot. Or maybe Mixpanel will be angled at product people. I don't know, but
no, I think that's right.
Yeah,
it's a combination of product and marketers, probably for Mixpanel.
Yeah. And they were much more like, well, developers, have been burned using these tools that aren't built for them. So let's build something that's like does what they do, but is like much more tailored to developers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think then you can enable like the developer champion in that sale, right? And that's the key thing for companies like that. And like, I think that's kind of what I was referring to before about like, they have sway. They might not have like, I think the truth is like marketers have a lot of budget, and like that is like also why a lot of tools are oriented around like marketers, because there's a lot of money to be unlocked there. Like, but I think like enabling the developer to become a champion through great developer experience and everything that means, I think like that is really important to driving a future sale and like really making a sticky product as well.
Yeah, it goes on a massive tangent, but like I remember there being this like huge discussion of like, I don't know if I told you, back in the day I worked in sales at Stack Overflow, and like there was this whole thing of like, do companies see developers as like a cost or like I can't remember what the word was, like a value center or something, something corporate speak for like, and I feel like marketers get that extra budget because it's like, oh, we need to power the Valentine's promotion campaign that always brings us like $10 million. So we're going to spend $100,000 on this tool, no problem. Whereas like, if you're the dev team, you've got to, it's maybe in some companies harder to justify like how much money can we save by buying this thing, unless you're able to show that you're like, okay, this could also drive like, an extra million in sales or something.
Definitely. And yeah, I think absolutely. We see it like where marketing and sales tools coupled to revenue, they're like very easy to sign off money and budget for a lot of the time. And then, I think in product teams, like you're part of the cost of goods of the product being sold, and you need to think about margins. And like, it's really, I think in this market, especially, like we're seeing companies clamp down on spend in cloud tools, and like budgets being scrutinized a lot more about like, how much are we spending on that random tool over there that, is driving this? And is that the right investment? Should we build that? Should we buy it? Should we bring that in-house? Like, and these are all like really interesting conversations for engineering teams, and trying to make sure that they're getting the right kind of cost to value equation, And I think a really thin way to sell that is just like, we're saving you 10 engineering hours. Like, they're kind of not enough. Like, you need to sell like the full package, like how much infrastructure was like cost we're saving, how much like time you're saving on a regular basis of like keep the lights on work and maintenance and things like that. So that, I don't know if that answers and like, vibes with what you're saying.
Yeah, no. But, and so do you ever like try and tie it to like the more like the value side of things?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like, that is about the capabilities, right? It's like, I know anyone could probably build a Slack integration, but if you use Knock to do that, we just shipped a bunch of React components that you can drop into your product and have Slack up and running within an hour. And now, hey, guess what? That's one part of a much bigger story about multi-channel notifications that you can now enable, So I think like it's cost saving, but it's also like, I like to say this phrase of like, we're shipping your notification roadmap, like the roadmap that your product managers like had, right? And instead of them being like, oh, we got to deprioritize that again for, this big customer just has this feature that we need to ship. So therefore all these things have gone off. Now you can say, well, actually we get all of that and I'm saving engineering time, but it's more about the capabilities that you're enabling, right? Than just the pure engineering time that you're saving.
Yeah. I feel like this actually could have been the topic of the whole conversation of just like, how do you, how do you justify yourself
as a service.
as a
Yeah.
service?
Yeah, I think I'm actually like talking at lead dev in September about like making build versus buy decisions as an eng team. And a lot of this is about those kind of decisions about like, what capabilities do we want to invest in as a team? What do we want to outsource? Like, what's the cost of maintaining this service in-house? Like, where are the hidden costs? Like, I think a lot of things, and like, this is why things are being servicitized. And it was like, it came into my head. I'm like, that is a dumb word. Let's just go with it.
Servicetized.
Yeah. Why things are being made services. I think it's like, it's definitely, it's thinking about like, what's core to our business, obviously what's not core, and trying to outsource those. But it's also like, things seem really easy on the surface to ship great software today because we've got so many packages and we can just like layer in, capabilities kind of easily. But all code is a liability. Like, do you really want to own that liability, or do you want someone else to own it? So I think, that's kind of how I think about it a lot.
That's definitely how I see it as well. Although I think it's like, that's one of the things that maybe divides some engineers, I think.
Yeah. There's like a hubris of like every new product that launches on Hacker News, and someone's like, I could have built that in a weekend,
Yeah. It's interesting. That'll be, we won't open that kind of worms, because I think like this probably will be here for a long time. But
I would love to come back and talk about it some other time, Jack.
Okay, Chris, thanks so much for joining. Before you go, have you got one takeaway for those listening?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Jack. And I think my takeaway is APIs are immutable. Treat them as such, and do some design up front. And it's okay to be in a design phase for a while.
That's actually an amazing takeaway. I'm taking that one to heart. Chris, thank you so much for joining. If you want to learn more about Chris, Knock.app.
That's right.
And what's your Twitter handle?
It's CJ_Bell_, because couldn't get CJ Bell. So
yeah. So if you are CJ Bell, relinquish the handle. Otherwise,
please.
CJ Bell_. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back again soon.